Just get 10 minutes?
There was a lot of preparation that went into this debate, probably more than any other debate I've done. My process was simple. Create an outline of the key points of the issues, anticipate rebuttals and insert responses to most of the typical objections, address remarks that Sye had repeatedly and consistently presented, and address the topics more than the person. It's difficult to distill these philosophically dense topics down into easily digestible nuggets that anyone can grasp. Some of these are deep questions in philosophy that we've struggled with seemingly forever. If there's one glaring problem with my opening remarks, it's that there was simply too much information and it was delivered too quickly. I wrote and rewrote the opening statement several times, dropping entire sections and trying to ensure that I'd cover all of the bases. In the process of trying to cover all of the bases, it may be the case that some things were glossed over far too quickly. There are, though, just a few things that I'd like to clarify or correct. So let's take a look at parts of my opening statement. One of the first things you'll want to do in any debate is define your terms. You and your opponent may be using the same terms to point to different concepts. At the outset of my opening statement, I wanted to define the two labels that were most important to the debate: reasonable and believe.
The second point that's generally conceded is that absolute certainty isn't a required component of knowledge because we have no good reason to think that absolute certainty in the ultimate sense is possible to attain. I'm a bit of a philosophy buff, and I like thinking about knowledge and certainty and other topics that might arise tonight, but when it comes to propositional claims in general, and the topic of this debate specifically, knowledge and certainty are completely irrelevant. We don't wait until we have knowledge to act, and we don't wait until we have absolute certainty to act. We act in accordance with our beliefs, and we recognize that because our beliefs inform our actions and that our actions have consequences, it's in our best interest to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible.
It was, in this debate, important to distinguish between knowledge and belief and remind the audience that the question we were there to address was, is it reasonable to believe that God exists? And not, are we certain that God exists? Or do we know that God exists? Because Sye's entire position ignores this distinction and focuses entirely on knowledge. Throughout the debate, he disregarded the belief topic and kept repeatedly addressing knowledge by saying things like, Matt can't know he's not a brain in a vat. Matt can't know what truth is. Matt can't know anything. Noting at the outset that these are irrelevant to the topic and that these remarks were anticipated far in advance of the topic not only demonstrates that I understand my opponent's side at least as well, if not better than he does, but that I understand the topic. And every time my opponent makes a statement that addresses knowledge instead of belief, the audience is likely reminded that he's engaged in waving a big red herring and talking about some debate other than the one we're actually having.
So why is it that I don't think it's reasonable to believe that a God exists? First, because the claim hasn't been demonstrated to be reasonable. And by that I mean whenever we're presented with a claim, the default position is one of not believing. This is the reasonable starting point because if we begin by believing every claim, we'll wind up believing claims that are contradictory, and that way madness lies. Belief is the state of being convinced and is the result of becoming convinced. And we can become convinced for good reasons or bad reasons. We can become convinced rather quickly, or it might take some time. As I noted earlier, it's in our best interest to have good reasons, which is the topic of tonight's debate. Reasonableness is demonstrated by constructing arguments supported by evidence in such a way that they are valid and sound. I have yet to be presented any argument or evidence that combine to form a valid and sound argument for the existence of God, and this is the primary reason that I don't believe any gods exist and why I believe it's unreasonable to accept that they do.
Notice the way I'm phrasing things here. I'm giving my reasons. I'm defending my position. I'm explaining why I don't believe that belief in God is warranted. I'm not asserting that there's no evidence, nor am I claiming that there could never be any evidence. I'm merely acknowledging the situation from my perspective. The second reason that I give for believing that belief in God is not reasonable digs a little deeper into the problem of justifying beliefs.
Second, I don't believe it's reasonable to believe God exists because I've been offered no way of distinguishing between the various God claims to figure out which, if any, are true. Within Christianity alone, there are over 1,000 denominations. Combine this with all the various religions that currently exist, as well as the ones that no longer exist, and you have seemingly countless competing claims about gods and no reliable pathway to the truth of any of them. And this doesn't begin to address the various gods that might be proposed in the future. They can't all be right, but they can all be wrong.
When presenting my case, I started with 2 reasons why I do not believe that belief in God is reasonable. It's not enough to merely sit there and claim your opponent isn't presenting a case, which is what Sye is going to attempt in his rebuttal. My first reason called for evidence for the proposition that it's reasonable to believe a God exists. My second reason called for a mechanism by which we can verify the truth about these claims. These are both critical. First, they establish the foundations upon which I would be willing to change my mind, setting up the opportunity to ask my opponent what would change his mind. Second, they address the 2 key problems with his position, that he's not an evidentialist and won't be presenting evidence, and that he's claiming that no worldview except his can possibly lead to truth, but he's not going to demonstrate this or explain it. These 2 points provide a callback reference that I can use to demonstrate that my opponent hasn't made his case and hasn't even attempted to make his case, rather than just sitting there and pretending or claiming that he hasn't made a case. If there's one real problem here, it's that I should have had a visual slide to go along with these points so that they resonate more strongly with the audience. The next step in my opening is to foreshadow what Sye is likely to say over the course of the evening.
While many Christians claim divine revelation, some even claiming that the truth has been revealed to them in such a way that there's no possibility that they could be wrong, there's hardly any points of doctrine upon which all these purported conduits of divine revelation agree, which means that some, if not all of them, are wrong. And if you want to know what's wrong with Judaism, you ask a Christian. If you want to know what's wrong with Christianity, ask a Muslim. If you want to know what's wrong with Catholicism or Protestantism or Calvinism, Hyper-Calvinism, Neo-Calvinism, Southern Baptist, the Church of Christ, or the First Baptist Church of Memphis, you can go to the Second Baptist Church of Memphis or any other denomination. They offer no verifiable method by which we can determine the truth of their claims. They use similar labels, similar holy books, and they band together against similar perceived enemies, but they offer no reasonable justification for anyone to accept their claims as they fight about those claims amongst themselves. After a lengthy discussion attempting to do just that, they retreat back to, you have to have faith, or God has revealed it to me, or some other epistemologically vapid response.
After presenting 2 reasons to support my belief that it isn't reasonable to believe that a God exists and anticipating some of the responses, I then present my third reason.
Third reason I don't believe it's reasonable to believe God exists is because there doesn't appear to be any way to demonstrate supernatural causation.
If we're going to make a reasoned case for a God, and that God is a supernatural agent, we must have a mechanism for identifying a causal link to that supernatural agent. There are no verifiable methods to do this, and it's a huge problem for any claim that a God exists. Essentially, they're claiming to be God detectors, even though they can offer no sound foundation to support this. This is a problem that the presuppositionalists recognize and are desperately trying to avoid. By presupposing God and shunning attempts to demonstrate the existence of God using evidence, they think they've escaped the problem. They haven't. Even if a God existed and was required to exist in order to ensure the reliability of reason, they'd have no way to tell or demonstrate this because they are, as far as we can tell, stuck in the same reality with the same limitations. To get around this problem, they resort to special pleading, claiming that God can somehow make them certain despite the fact that they have the same limitations the rest of us have. Yet they never demonstrate that this is true or attempt to offer an explanation of how this could possibly work. If I don't understand cosmology, and I happen to know a cosmologist who understands the topic without error and without any possibility of being uncertain, something that no cosmologist would claim, having them explain something to me still does not make me certain, because I have no way to confirm that they are, in fact, certain and without error. I might have faith that this person isn't wrong, but it's simply dishonest of me to assert that their certainty can somehow make me certain, and that's the problem. Presuppositionalists want to avoid the implication that they, like the evidentialists, are claiming to be able to verify supernatural causation. But if their claim is that God can make them certain, they're doing exactly that. What's worse is that their claim to certainty by proxy has no demonstrable justification, and their only recourse, as we'll see later, is special pleading fallacious arguments that God can somehow magically make them certain and infallible despite their fallibility.
While we're talking about changing and refining views, Sye may bring up things I've said in the past, but he's most likely arguing against straw mat and is once again engaged in some debate other than this one. If he digs around, he can find quotes of me as a Christian, but it'd be better if he addresses the positions I'm actually defending here. I'm not the one asserting a rigid mindset impervious to clarification, and it's possible that he's misunderstood or that I have changed or refined my position, as we'd hope science-minded folks would do, as I apologized to the solipsists that we hung up on.
Including a line like this isn't something you're likely to be able to do in most debates, and I had no idea how significant this line would actually be. I suspected that Sye would show clips of me, but I never suspected he'd show so many, or that he'd show so many that were actually accurate and served as sound rebuttals to some of his points. Noting that a clip of something I've said may be misrepresented, misunderstood, or out of date exposed the bulk of his debate strategy as dishonest and short-sighted. In the next clip, I drive home the problems that arise when people claim supernatural sources that cannot be verified.
Yet somehow many theists are running around claiming to be little God detectors, capable of determining supernatural causation as well as divine guidance and instruction, many claiming that they can't be wrong, yet none of them can offer any sort of testable mechanism by which we can verify this.
After pointing out this problem of verification, I wanted to end my opening by talking about what sort of evidence might give us some justification to think that believers might be on to something, and then point out that we don't have any such evidence, and all attempts to attain that evidence have backfired. The final note of my opening merely underscores that we don't live in the sort of world that is consistent with most claims that a God exists, and that any being worthy of the God label should understand our limitations and be able to work within those limitations.
In short, if prayers of Group X were consistently lined up with actual results, there'd definitely be something there worth believing. Perhaps not that a God is answering the prayers, but that the practices could be effective. But that's not the case. Not only has there been no demonstration of that, but repeated tests have demonstrated no such manifestation of phenomena beyond the dictates of chance. When faced with this failure, we often hear, "Thou shalt not put the Lord thy God to the test." Well, I'm very sorry, but until that situation changes, it simply cannot be reasonable to believe that a God exists. What's worse is that any intelligent God should be well aware of the limitations of our ability to reason and investigate supernatural causes. Any intelligent God who created us and stuck us in this world where we rely on reason and evidence to lead us toward the truth should definitely be aware of this limitation. And any decent God who expects us to reach the conclusion that he exists would have taken steps to alleviate the problem. As the problem is still apparently unresolved, I think we're trending toward the conclusion that no such gods exist, but at a minimum, it simply is not reasonable to believe that a God does exist. Thank you.
And now let's move on to Sye's rebuttal to my opening statement.
That's all we heard. 10 minutes from somebody who can't know that he's not a brain in a vat.
There are several points in the debate where the language is going to get muddled and confused. Sye is going to repeatedly string together a chain of explicit and implicit equivocations that begin with a vague notion of uncertainty that he extrapolates to reach the conclusion that nothing can be known under my worldview. He'll claim to be using my definition of knowledge and that he's not making certainty a component of knowledge, but he repeatedly betrays this by doing exactly that. In this example, the fact that I cannot know that I am not a brain in a vat does not mean that I am a brain in a vat, nor does it mean that it's likely that I'm a brain in a vat, nor have we demonstrated that it's even possible that I'm a brain in a vat. Sye also hasn't demonstrated that if I am in fact a brain in a vat, that this in any way prevents me from reasoning correctly about the reality I experience. His entire position is based on my own uncertainty without demonstrating that uncertainty is a problem or that he actually has a mechanism to avoid this uncertainty. And by equivocating between the reality I experience and ultimate reality, he seeks to set up a position where he can claim that I can't know anything because I can't know one specific thing. And this is yet another fallacy.
Debates presuppose truth. Matt says truth is that which corresponds to reality. Matt admits he can't know what's real.
Actually, I didn't admit that I can't know what's real. What I acknowledged is that I can't know if the reality I experience, also known as what's real, is in fact the ultimate reality. Sye is going to repeatedly equivocate between reality and ultimate reality, however it suits his case, in part because he thinks that he can know that they are one and the same. Later, he'll equivocate between reality and view of reality as well.
You can't know anything to be true unless you start with God. Everyone here knows that God exists. Why don't I present evidence? Why don't I present evidence? Where do you hear evidence out in the world? In the court of law. Who do you present evidence to in court? The judge. When you come up to me and say you don't believe in God, and I present you with evidence, I'm saying that you're the judge. You're not the judge. God is the judge. All of you know that he exists. When you come to a debate, you want to hear whether or not what we're arguing is true. You want to know if it's true that God exists. Well, tonight I'm going to wait to see if Matt ever tells me how he can know anything to be true according to his worldview.
Here, Sye acknowledges that he won't present evidence because that would make us the judge of whether or not a God exists. And he's right, it would, and that's exactly what should happen. You present evidence anytime you're trying to convince someone of something. Sye says that we already know that God exists, and he's not here to try to convince us of what we already know, but he's wrong. He's wrong that I in fact know that God exists because I don't. I can't demonstrate this. But he's also wrong because he's here at this debate to convince us not necessarily that a God exists, but that we already know this to be true, which means he's already acknowledged that we are in fact the judge. This is the process by which we have conversations. He begins by pointing out that a debate, your goal is to get to the truth. Well, there's no way to do that without the presentation of argument and evidence. There's no way to do that without acknowledging that you are presenting things for someone else to consider and judge. At the end of his remarks here, he says that he's going to wait to see if I can offer a way from my worldview to account for truth. But that's a blatant, fallacious, and dishonest statement. Even if I do fail to give an account for truth, that doesn't mean that he can, and that's the issue in question. Sye's position, as is the position of other presuppositionalists, is that his worldview, and only his worldview, can account for truth. He offers no justification for this. He offers no way to demonstrate that he can account for truth. He offers no way to demonstrate that no other worldview could. But he implies that if I can't, then either he wins outright, or I have no basis to question his assertion, which is basically a denial of the foundations of reason that we already agreed we both accept.
Matt did talk about logical absolutes, and we do believe in logical absolutes.
If biochemical reactions are all that you are thinking, then all that you can say is that what you perceive to be logically true and absolute and necessary is nothing more than the result of chemical reactions in your brain.
Agreed.
Matt agrees that his view on logic is a result of the chemical reaction in his brain. I mean, would you come here today and listen to a debate? It was a bottle of Dr. Pepper arguing against a bottle of Mountain Dew. You shake them up and you open them and they start to fizz. Which of those fizzes would be true? Neither. It's just fizz. If Matt's worldview is true, then our brains are just evolved meat machines. And our thoughts are the byproduct of the chemical reactions in our evolved brains.
Acknowledging that our brains are electrochemical machines, or evolved meat machines, as Sye put it, is not in any way a claim that these machines cannot reason. Sye tries to call thoughts a byproduct of that machine and tries to equate this with bottles of soft drinks fizzing. The simplest response to this, once again, comes from my friend Ozymandias Ramses II. A pocket calculator exhibits its reliability and utility as a means of doing arithmetic, just as our brains can, and the fact that a calculator's capacity to generate correct answers is a product of electrical circuitry in no way undermines the truths of mathematics. Meanwhile, it's simply a fact that our brains are physical, electrochemical, thinking machines, whether they were made by a god or evolved through natural means. Sye's objection to brains thinking defeats itself. He's trying to argue for something magical to distinguish a brain thinking from soda fizzing, but he might as well be looking for something magical to distinguish a soda fizzing from waves crashing or any other phenomenon.
You can't get truth from that. You see, Matt's view on logical absolutes, as far as he knows, could be fed to him from a computer when he's a brain in a vat.
Here, Sye is attempting to exploit my uncertainty to suggest that my thoughts about the logical absolutes could be being fed to me from a computer. This is not in any way a relevant objection to my position, and certainly isn't a defense of his. The source of my thoughts is irrelevant to whether or not my thoughts are accurate. This is the case whether your thoughts are generated by your mind, inserted into your brain by a computer, or affirmed by the God of the universe. The question isn't, how do you account for the logical absolutes? It's, are the logical absolutes true, or is it reasonable to accept the logical absolutes?
See, there's not really much more I have to say about that. Yeah, you can laugh all you want. No, I'll keep going. I'll just preach to you.
By this point, Sye's had a couple of lengthy pauses, and he doesn't seem to have anything left to say. And when the pause gets awkward, he notes that he'll just preach instead of offering a rebuttal. And many took this remark as an admission of defeat in that he had nothing more to say.
I mean, I could stand up here and say, well, Matt says that it's always wrong to own humans, which he said on the show a number of times. But then on another show, he says that humans are just animals. And Matt owns animals. You know, he even eats animals. I could show the inconsistency there. I could show that inconsistency, but that's not the topic of this debate.
He's just finished a notable pause where he notes that he has nothing more to say and will simply preach to us. He's now claimed that some position of mine is wrong and that he can demonstrate that it's wrong, but he won't because it's not the point of this debate. He's run off the rails at this point and is trying to find a way back on. On a side note, his implied rebuttal to my position that it's wrong to own humans appears to be something like this. Matt thinks it's wrong to own humans. Humans are animals. Therefore, Matt should think it's wrong to own animals. Matt thinks it's okay to own animals. Therefore, there's a contradiction. And when you're going through logical arguments to try to figure out whether or not they're sound, one of the good things to do is to substitute terms. Sye's already substituted terms a little bit by trying to equate humans with animals, as if the mere idea of being an animal is in fact the foundation for why I think it's wrong to own humans. You can make a substitution that says, Matt thinks it's wrong to own humans. Humans are made of atoms. Therefore, Matt should think it's wrong to own things made of atoms. He's going to follow this irrelevant side discussion up by actually agreeing with me.
It's reasonable to believe that God exists. Reason demands truth, and Matt can't make sense of truth without God. Everyone here knows that God exists, you know, and that's what I'm going to keep telling. And you know what? When I watch Matt's show, I agree with Matt more than I do the callers, the atheist, the Christian callers that call in. The Christians that call into a show, most of them want to make me puke. I watch the debates he's done. I see on YouTube where he's debating this supposed to be some clergyman who denies the authority of Scripture. And people put on their Matt is finally challenging the debate. I think it's garbage. It's garbage.
To his credit, Sye is attempting to maintain a consistent position that Christians attempting to prove God is sinful, and there's nothing wrong with finding a point of agreement with your opponent. In this case, though, it doesn't read as, Matt and I agree on X, but more like an arrogant, frustrated dismissal of the people who don't agree with his tactical assessment of apologetics. And he's about to express yet another frustration.
I'm glad that we're finally here today. I hope that we do. See, I wanted a free exchange where Matt and I could just talk to each other, and guess what? The debate organizers didn't. I wanted, that's right, you didn't, Sarah, you didn't want that. And I said, well, I know Matt wants that. He doesn't like the formal debate. He wants just an exchange. I said, ask Matt. And they said, no, Matt, he doesn't want that either. He wants us to own the time of the questions. See, because otherwise the bully can take over.
Sye calls out Sarah Moorhead, the event organizer, from the stage. This isn't the only time he'll do this, and it's going to get worse later in the debate. I think the later outburst really shows his character, so I'll address that when we get there. For this point, though, I want to explain why he's wrong about what I want with respect to debate format. Sye wanted to have essentially no format, just show up and talk. And this is actually something I might enjoy, but it's not necessarily my preferred format. And it works best when you have two people who are both interested in the discussion and who have similar understandings of reason and truth. That's not the case here. Sye hasn't made any attempt to make any case for his worldview. He is, in fact, merely asserting that my worldview can't account for truth and reason in order to claim that I have no basis to challenge his assertions. That's going to result in two people who just say stuff without ever actually engaging, without drilling down to whether or not there's a possibility that they could agree. Later, he's going to respond to questions with vapid, hand-waving responses like, "For reasons which are perfectly suitable to God," and "I won't debate Scripture with professed atheists." But he's going to close out his rebuttal by once again making an unfounded assertion that attempts to shift the focus to my worldview while doing nothing to defend his own.
Listen to whether or not Matt can show you how he can know anything to be true. He says he could be a brain in a vat. Well, anything he says is borrowing from my worldview. Anything that he claims to be true, ask him to define it. See where that comes from. And, well, we'll see how that goes from now.
So we've already addressed the fact that this is simply fallacious. My inability to count for truth, reason, reality, or anything is irrelevant to whether his worldview can, in fact, account for them, or whether any worldview can. Remember, his position is that his worldview can account for these things, and no other worldview can. In the next video, we'll take a look at my rebuttal, as well as highlights from the cross-examination portion of this debate. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support by visiting patreon.com/atheistdebates.